All right. Four, three, two, one. Hello, this is Joseph Aleo, and you are listening to Mage, the podcast. It's the show dedicated to all things Mage, and we are doing a new segment. Well, actually, it's the second time we're doing a segment. It's called Mage Chronicles. And what we do is that we talk to someone who is either a player or a storyteller in a chronicle, and they talk about what made that chronicle so special. Now, for example, last month we had Joseph Victor Kinzer on the show, and he talked about running the Sorcerer's Crusade Chronicle. And he said he had a wonderful time. We actually had Satiris Brucato, the co-creator of Mage, on the show as well, and it was magical. Now, on today's show, we're going to be talking to Panos Skordas, and you are calling from where, Panos?
From Greece.
But where specifically in Greece?
I live in the capital, where I also grew up, in Athens.
Well, thank you for joining us on the show today.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Joseph.
Now, if I remember correctly, we tried to do this a month ago, but there was a storm and there were some electrical problems. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Well, I'm glad that's past us. I'm going to ask you some very basic questions. It's the questions I ask every single new guest. So the very first question, you might even know what it is, but how did you get into role-playing games in the first place?
Actually, this is a very interesting and somewhat funny story. It's not a short one though, so long story short, I met some guys that were playing role-playing games, Mage to be more specific, at a camping about 18 years back, I think. And they were telling me all these stories about what their characters could do with the spheres from Mage and all this, and I was really intrigued. A few years went by, and I decided to visit my local hobby store, where I met a very good friend of mine up to this day, known on Facebook as Sonia Christine, who grabbed me by a hand and made me play at the local Vampire the Masquerade LARP. So that was that. I started playing. The very first day I stepped my foot into a hobby store.
Oh my goodness. And you started off with the LARP?
Yes, I started with a LARP. It
So
was a great experience. I have this childish feeling of days that are never going to come back whenever I think of this live.
do you remember what happened during that LARP? I know it was a long time ago, but what do you recall?
Actually, I recall most of the plots because it was really interesting. I made some really good friends during these days, friends that I am happy to call my friends even today. So I remember many of the things that have happened, the stories, the plots, the intrigues and the conflicts between the various characters, really interesting stuff. But what stayed with me most, what I carry to this day, is the very first time that I entered the room where the live was played, and I watched all these people being in character, and I had this feeling like I am stepping inside a different world, like I was actually sidestepping into the Umbra. And the feeling that I went down this rabbit hole and never came back is the first thing that I remember from this live, and I still try to carry it into my chronicles.
That is amazing. I have never LARPed before, and I've been playing role-playing games for a very long time. That is going off the deep end. So what happened next after that magical experience?
After that magical experience, I had to leave Athens and go and study to a different city here in Greece. So it was a new place, new people. I was lucky enough to find people to play with. Um, but most of them were looking for a storyteller, and I never tried my hand in storytelling, and I thought, why not give it a go? I can't be that bad, and I've been a player 3 times since then. I can't
Whoa,
seem to be able to nail a position as a player anymore. I've been mostly storytelling since I was 19 years old, and now I'm 33.
that is incredible. Now, a lot of people, they prefer to be players. Some people prefer to be storytellers. What is it you enjoy so much about being the storyteller, the person who runs the game?
Um, Another interesting question. Um, Let me think about it for a moment.
Certainly.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is the idea of creating, of setting the stage, of having fun with your friends, writing, and all that. And it is actually difficult to choose between all that, to to be specific about what I like most about being a storyteller. But now that I come to think of it, what I actually appreciate most is that feeling when a session ends, the smiles in my players' faces, how they laugh and they tell me that they can't wait to do it again. That makes me feel that I really love being a storyteller.
Oh, that is the best feeling. All right, so I have a question for you. You've been running games for 19 years. How has the way you have run games changed, or what have you learned since you began playing games?
Well, when I started as a storyteller, to be entirely honest, I wasn't really good. I remember myself being nervous, awkward, viewing my plots from I don't. It's a strange phrase to use, but I'm going to use it anyway. I saw things through a ballistic lens. I understood the world as a younger man through conflict, and I thought that combat was paramount to a game. So I considered the NPCs and the spirits and the things that my players were facing along the way in a monstrous manual kind of way, if you know what I mean.
I do.
Uh, and this changed over time, mostly because I was reading a lot, and I started changing my viewpoint on how a nice story should be run by reading Gaiman, by reading Clive Barker. I love Rowling. I have a passion for Hogwarts, I must admit. um, and but it was not also the passive means that changed me, the things that I did for myself. It was also the aggressive, but not in a bad way, disposition of some of my more strong-headed players. Um, I feel glad and happy and proud to say that most of my friends are really intelligent people. They read a lot, they love fantasy, but they also love science fiction and science and art. They follow many fields, so I was receiving their ideas about their campaign. I saw how they were playing, how they were interacting with my world, and I came to understand that through feeling what they wanted, what they needed from my campaign, seeing their interactions, and of course discussing and arguing philosophy after sessions, how the world was not always the thing I thought him to be. And as Mage is a game about not an all-encompassing reality, but about an ever-changing reality, I realized that in order to be able to become a good storyteller in Mage, I had to be open to changing my own reality. And I did this by opening myself to the opinions of the people around me. And I tried to encompass these opinions into my games so that they wouldn't be singular, focused, linear, in a way that would show that there is only a single intellect behind them. I like to think that all my friends that have played with me are actually the intellect behind my games.
I think some of your friends might be online with us right now. So if you are listening, and even if you're not one of Panos' friends, if you have a question or something you'd like to bring up, send us a text message and we will respond. It looks like it's all in Greek, so actually, Panos, you'll have to translate for us.
Okay.
So, before we go into your special chronicle, which is called The Vile Nature of the Ascension War, I have one more question. We live in a network internet world now. Are there any special tools that you use to run your campaigns, like Google Docs or Evernote, or do you just stick to note cards and note paper, or both?
Actually, most of my friends and my storytelling peers make a lot of fun of me because they believe that sometimes I'm a little bit crazy about preparing my campaigns. So I like to have everything jotted down, the NPCs, the stories, personal information about my players and their characters, so that the plot follows not a line but a circle that is focused not only in a repeatable way, but in a way that there is consistency, and my players feel that there are rules and there are laws to be followed, and they don't expect things to change every now and then in a way that they feel confused. So they know that when they see something in the game, when they feel something in the game, when their instinct tells them that something is wrong, more often than not, they are actually right, because there are these little details that I put into my characters, and because they are so many, I have to write them down. So I use Google Docs in order to prepare my campaign, which then I download into an EPUB format. I turn it into a MOBI format using Calibre, and then I copy it to my Kindle device, which I always carry in my sessions, so that I can run fastly between characters, plots, NPCs, statistics of enemies, etc., etc.
That is a very interesting setup. I may have to try that myself. All right, one last question before we get into your campaign, your chronicle. How long do you think it takes for you to prepare for a chronicle?
Actually, this is a question that I expected you to make of me, and I was thinking a lot about how I should answer it. Truth is, I cannot chop down my preparation time into specific intervals. And the reason because of that, it's because I have been preparing my campaign for so long that all these hours that I have put into preparing it are somewhat merged in my mind. There are sessions that I find the need to create a few NPCs in order to supplement the needs of my plot. So I will maybe have to work for 1 or 2 hours in order to prepare what is required of me in order to run smoothly the session. But there are times that the players do something that I find really clever, or maybe they change the pace. They try to show me in their own way that they are not in the mood for fighting, or they are not in the mood to follow the plot, and what they really need is to go to a party, have some drinks, speaking amongst themselves as the player characters. And in times like this, when I know that they feel the need to take it there, I don't have to do any preparation because I know what NPCs they are going to want to speak to, because I try to read between the interactions of my players and the NPCs, and I tend to know who likes who would like to speak with whom. And since I already have these NPCs prepared and I know their mannerisms and what makes them tick, because most of them are characters of old players of mine, I don't need to write a single dot.
All right, that's what I want to get to. I want to get to that kind of role playing when I run my chronicle. But let's talk about your chronicle. You said it's called The Vile Nature of the Ascension War. Tell us about this
Exactly.
chronicle.
This chronicle started small. Actually, it was the mainstream fantasy idea of an elder evil god coming to our world, trying to devour it. Things that I like to call D&D stuff. The idea behind this chronicle still remains. There is a major evil force that is playing an important part in the development of the story. But as the story evolved, and as I said before, I started to change my opinion on how things should run because of the things that I had read or because of the things that I had discussed with my players. I decided that a mage campaign needed to be something a lot more deeper than that. So, in time, politics, social problems, emotional problems, the dirt, the dark, evil corners of the cosmopolitan side of the world of darkness started to creep into my campaign and change it into something more along the line of stories like John Constantine's. I don't know if you've ever read the comics of John
Oh,
Constantine, Hellblazer.
I'm a big fan, big fan.
Perfect, so you understand exactly what I'm saying. John Constantine is a great example of a mage. From one side you have all this magical situation about demons and evil and rituals and all that, but if you look deep into the story, what you see is that people, simple people, everyday people, their choices, their pains, their anger, their fury about everything that's wrong with our world is the real force behind all the bad things that are happening to us. Abstaining ourselves from unity, being egotistical, searching for knowledge for the sake of knowledge but not for the betterment of mankind, the hunt for power and money, and the manipulation of sex, making it look like something that it is dark or evil or wrong, mostly by religion. All these problems are deeply touched by the comics of John Constantine and from other writers like Barker or Gaiman or Moore. And after reading their books, I really decided what I really wanted to do with my Mage campaign. So it might have begun from a point where just an evil god wanted to devour the world, but it developed itself into a lesson about what's really wrong with the world. And what I'm trying to make my players to do is try to change it. And that is when they start to feel that they are in the world of darkness. That is when they start to suffer, because they realize that they cannot change the world by throwing fireballs down the street. And that's what Mage is really all about. The lesson that you cannot change reality with magic, that to change reality you have to change yourself, and the betterment of oneself is why the game is called Mage the Ascension.
So, it's called The Vile Nature of the Ascension War. How did you tie it into the Ascension War?
How did I tie it into the Ascension War? Well, in a way, our world is already suffering through a non-fantastical version of what we call the Ascension War. There is such a thing called a free spirit, and there is such a thing called the technocracy. People who see the world through crunching numbers. So the conflict is already there, it is all around us. I tied my campaign into the Ascension War by putting my players into the position of a newly awakened cabal, living their lives in a London that had been recently devastated by the technocracy. 5 years ago, they had captured, imprisoned, or murdered most of the awakened population of London. Many of my players' characters were actually awakened back then, and they had to see their mentors die to protect them, or even have to leave the country in order to survive. So for a long time they had to stay out of the loop, afraid that bad things would happen to them like they happened to their mentors if they actively practice magic. This changed when a very powerful chantry located near the Deep Umbra was destroyed by the evil force known as Ahriman, and the few surviving mages of this chantry had to escape and find their way to the city of London. And that's when everything started to change. That's when the technocracy decided that it was time for round two. While at the same time my players are facing their personal issues, everyday problems, job related or family related stuff. At the same time, they participate in a living world around them where is this major conflict about what the world thinks, what the world feels, what the world needs, and how it blinds them not only to the supernatural threat that is coming from another world, but also from the threat that they cause themselves, that they are themselves. The elder mages, the few survivors of the past killing spree of the technocracy, they are afraid, they are tired, they do not want to lose their positions, they do not want to share their chantries with the newcomers. The newcomers have no base of operations, they find survival more difficult every day while the technocracy hunts them. At the same time, political changes, economical changes, ecological changes all around the world play their part in the development of the story, in how the players and the NPCs around them suffer the changes of a world that at times even despises how they try to change the world to make it a different place. But in the end, what really ties them to the campaign is their lives. The small world of their lives is a projection of the big problems of the larger cosmos, of the Tellurian itself. And even if they want to escape its changes and the changes they go through themselves, they cannot. So they find themselves all the time in positions that make them realize that they are not any kind of special heroes, that they are destined to save the world. They are just people who realize that their suffering will become everyone's suffering if they don't do something about it. And they do.
All right, so now we have the background of the game, and here's where we get to the meat of the matter. What made this particular chronicle so special?
What I really love about this chronicle, besides the fact that I have been running it for a really long time, is how it advanced and it evolved in its own. Playing with powerful people all my life, people with large hearts, with broad minds, people who read, who play music, who study art, who like to understand the world around them. They really felt the need to go deep into this specific game, because I tried from the very beginning to make them understand that what Mage was truly about was about altered perceptions, about understanding that everyone's reality is absolutely personal, that you have to respect this personal reality of every person and to allow it to reflect on the need for unity in order to make the world a better place. Having the luck of having such players in my table, the story kept evolving in unexpected ways. It pushed me to take turns that I never imagined that I would take, and that made me feel like in the beginning I was telling the story, but while the campaign was evolving I ended up living it, seeing it with my friends, evolving, unveiling its finer points all around me without me even knowing it. It became a story that it felt like someone else was actually writing, and I loved it for its nice moments. I loved it because it was passionate. I loved it because my players were involved. I'm not going to say that I am a great storyteller, or that my stories are great, or that I am doing things that no one else does. But I am going to say that I have friends who actually do, and they took me on this journey and they made it so beautiful that in the end it became like a book, which I love because I wrote the first chapter, but I fall in love with because the following chapters were written by my players, and that made it my favorite book, and that made it my favorite chronicle amongst all those that I have storytelled before.
That is wonderful. And I'm going to ask you a question. This might be difficult to answer, but can you give us an example of how the game took a life of its own, how the players took it in a direction you did not expect?
Um, well, in this is the sixth or seventh greater chapter, part, chronicle, whatever you want to call it, of this whole campaign. Amongst my players, only one is a previous Mage player of mine. The rest are new. They not new in role-playing games, but they are new in Mage. They are playing Mage for the first time. To start with, there was a great change for me, not about the player characters they created, but I will go to this shortly. It was also about the people themselves. I I wouldn't like to elaborate on their personal lives, on their feelings or their needs, but I'm going to say that some of them belong to groups of people that I never had the joy of interacting with. So they created new train of thoughts and made me try to. They broadened my horizons. They made me question things that I never had to question before, and that made me wanting to add things to my campaign that they would appreciate more, and it also made the campaign something different than the original that I had in my mind. A very good friend of mine created an artistic Cult of Ecstasy character. She is into organizing orgies for rich men. Yeah, and but she has this philosophy about it, that she's not doing it only for the money, but she's also doing it because she's trying to put a lesson into what she's doing. The colors, the scents, the aromas, the dressing, the theme of the party always tries to tell something to the participants. So you can imagine that me being a person that I have never actually participated in an orgy, I had to research orgies, try to, yeah, I know it sounds funny, but I had to research orgies. I had to understand orgies. I had to grasp any connection that can be between orgies and metaphysics in order to incorporate it into the campaign in a way that is teaching and not funny. Of course, being Greek and having gods like Dionysus or Pan, you can understand that finding metaphysical connections between orgies and magic was not difficult at all.
Well, when you mentioned this, it actually sounded like she was trying to make a chronicle out of an orgy.
Yeah, yeah, and she actually did. She actually did because she made me do things, she made me run things, she made me create the kind of NPCs that I would never create in any other campaign. And that adds to my skill set as a storyteller because I actually had to read, I actually had to understand, I actually had to study in order to comprehend how making an orgy can actually be art. And it can.
All right. I did not expect this to come up during our conversation. So tell me one of the things you learned about orgies.
Uh, One thing I learned about orgies, well, that actually London has not so underground clubs that actually organize some of the best of them. So it's funny because my campaign is located in London, so
Perfect.
I had great opportunities to make it connect and make it a part of my story. And of course, because she's, into this rich societies kind of thing, people that pay because they want really special experiences. This gave me the opportunity to bring actual real life political persons as NPCs into the Chronicle.
So when I initially went on Facebook to the Mage the Ascension group and asked for people to submit ideas of chronicles that they thought were very special, one of the things that you mentioned, if I remember correctly, is that there was also you had some sessions that dealt with slut-shaming. Was this in this particular chronicle?
Yes, yes, it was in this particular chronicle. There was, I got that idea reading American Gods. Remember media, this new age digital goddess, the personification of social media, of television, of radio, of telecommunications, all these new age technology, spiritual thingy that could actually really greatly be incorporated in a mage campaign.
So give me some examples of how that was incorporated into your chronicle.
One of my players' sister is a student. She is going to high school. She is an NPC. She's called Lydia. Lydia one day returned from school. She was really agitated, really sad, and she told her brother that a student in her school, a female student, had committed suicide. My player felt that something was wrong with her sister, that this was annoying her in a far more deep level than just having someone you barely know dying in your school. So he mind scanned her and he realized that it was really personal to her and that she felt guilt, like she was somehow responsible for it. Oh, here they are, they got us.
Well, I think this is an example of what you said about how you have to make a war on the wrong ideas on a human scale.
Exactly, exactly. So my player, Socrates, started searching into this matter, and he realized that the girl died because she participated into a very dangerous online game that you might have heard. It's called Blue Whale. It supposedly originated from Russia, and it makes young people try all the more dangerous things until in the end they are asked to commit suicide. Have you ever heard of this sick game?
I have never heard of it, not until you mentioned it.
Yeah, actually, it's a thing. You should research it. It's really interesting, but it's really, really sick. There are these guys that create false social media accounts. They approach young men and women whom they deem appropriate victims for the scam because maybe they make dark remarks on the internet, or maybe they are flirting with the idea of danger or even committing suicide, and they push them to do all the more dangerous things until in the end they ask them to commit suicide. Actually, this sick game, it has claimed the lives of quite a few young people, both here in Europe and in Americas. So my players, they realized that it was actually this game that caused the girl to start to commit suicide. So they looked into the matter, and the more deeply they went into it, the more they started to feel like there was something supernatural behind it. But in the end, they realized that it was just pure humane sickness, the evil that lies inside all of us. The true lesson about evil in the world of darkness, which for me is that there is no such thing as the devil made me do it. People do seek things, and the devil is a part of this world.
You know, in the Chronicle that I'm putting together, the big bad, of course, is the Nefandi. But what I keep on coming back to is you don't really need the Nefandi. Humans can be just as terrible all on their own.
Yes, yes, they can, and this can be a very important theme in Mage the Ascension, and a core one, because you have to understand, Joseph, that in Mage, humans own the place. They are the soul of reality. They decide, in a way, how reality works. There are spirits of hate because humans hate. There are spirits of love because humans love. It's not the other way around. The world of darkness is not trying to tell you that for everything wrong that is happening in this world, dark mages or dark wizards or evil necromancers are behind it. It's actually the other way around. So, in my campaign, my players realized that, and they felt really bad about it because they realized that they really couldn't do anything about it. All this situation with social media, the power of applications like Facebook or Instagram, they have gathered enough of the people's energy, of the people's emotions, memories, moments, even personal communications, that they have gathered such power that can actually be considered gods in their own right. And that's why I made a reference to Neil Gaiman before, because in American Gods the same thing happens with media. So when my players realized this thing, they realized that this entity can be a force for both good and evil, and it's humanity's actions that actually decide that. And they cannot change it by destroying the spirit, they cannot change it by changing how the spirit works, but they realized they had to change it by changing how they interact with the world and change the world through this interaction. So this player, Socrates, whose sister was the girl, one of the girls who actually slut-shamed the girl who committed suicide, had this great idea about changing the situation without magic. And he created this opposite game of the blue whale, which he called the red dolphin. And he did the exact same thing, though he was not asking the children to do dangerous things for the sake of danger, but to do dangerous things for the sake of helping someone, like interfering in situation of domestic violence or standing up to dangerous bullies and things like that. And that's when they realized that their true power was in changing themselves. They firstly had to change themselves. They had to understand that it's not their magic that makes them what they are, but it is their belief, their philosophy that makes them what they are. Like my very good friend Atonis Raven has one told, it's not Arete that powers magic, it's that magic is a byproduct of Arete. And Arete is this, it is understanding, it's changing thought process.
And on that note, I think that is a perfect time to bring the show to a close. But I have to say, Panos, I really wish I would have had the opportunity to play in your Chronicle. It sounds fantastic. And it's still going on, correct?
Yes, it's still going on, and it will keep going on, I hope, for a really long time. We are at the beginning of this circle of the plot. Cycle of the plot, sorry.
So if people would like to learn more about you or more about the Chronicles you've run, is there a place they could find you online?
Like in a personal web page or something?
A web page, Facebook, Twitter, or if you don't feel like sharing, I totally understand.
No, I don't mind. I don't mind. Actually, I noticed recently that I have 666 friends in Facebook, and I am debating with myself whether I should stop accepting new friends or maybe unfriend some of the old ones in order to make new ones and keep the number at the same level. But I am just joking. I am always open to people who are interested, to exchanging ideas with me, to learn from me and for me to learn from them.
I really love your openness to people and different ideas. We have been talking to Panos Skordas, and we've been talking about his Chronicle, The Vile Nature of the Ascension War. Join us again next week. We might be doing another Mage Chronicle. You can find us online at magethepodcast.com or follow us on Twitter at magethepodcast. And also, I am running a Chronicle on Twitter, and you can just follow us at hashtag MTRPG. That's Mage Twitter Role-Playing Game. Subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and now on the TuneIn app, excuse me. And please, give us a review or a rating on iTunes. It helps people find the show. And for Panos Skordas, I'm Joseph Aleo. Thanks for listening to Mage the Podcast. See you next week.